Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
and me, Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Our guest today is Richard Kelly Kemick. Richard Kelly Kemick is an award-winning poet, journalist, and fiction writer. His limited series podcast, Natural Life, is an intimate and unexpectedly honest documentary on his cousin, who is serving a life sentence without parole in Michigan. Richard is also the author of I Am Herod, which takes readers undercover at one of the world's largest religious events, and Caribou Run, a collection of poetry. He is the recipient of multiple awards, including 2 National Magazine Awards and the Writers Guild of Alberta's 2019 Award for Best Short Story. His new book, Hello Horse, is a collection of short stories published by Biblioasis. He lives in Rossland, British Columbia. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much for having me, Kim.
So you've said that the different forms that you write in are like your children. Each one disappoints you for different reasons. Since your latest book is fiction, what do you find disappointing or gratifying about writing short stories?
Oh, that's a great question. Something that I find really gratifying about writing short stories is once in a while when when the stars align, I love the feeling of being able to convey a larger world than what's present on the page. I think maybe Chekhov does this for my money better than anyone, where from just a couple pages or paragraphs or even sentences, he's able to convey this feeling that these characters have such profound lives that extend far beyond the reaches of the story, that we're just kind of seeing in the train window as it flies past. I love that feeling. And then that's certainly what I try to emulate in my own writing. And it's really thrilling when I feel like at times I'm on the right track. And maybe to the second point of the question, something that I find disappointing about short fiction is how difficult it is to achieve that sensation or that feeling or within a story that it exists outside of the confines of itself. I find it's almost like this alchemical process that it's hard to put my finger on exactly what leads to that. But more often than not, it's just trying and profoundly failing. So, but then I guess too that only contributes more to the thrill of pursuing it in trying to get it right.
How do the stories start for you? Is there an image, a setting? Do you carry around a notebook of ideas? What's that spark that ignites narrative for you?
Sure, Sarah. Oftentimes it's someone's voice that I hear, like just kind of their manner of speaking, maybe is more specific than voice itself. Yeah, there's something about their voice that I just find so intoxicating. Most of the which is why most of the stories, almost all the stories, are written in first person. That when I start writing, like there's a woman I used to date who is the narrator of the title story, Hello Horse. The story itself has nothing to do with her life, but it's just that when I was going out with her, I just loved the way she would phrase a sentence. The weird verbs that she'd use that were always just like 2 steps away from what you were expecting. So it's still like the right verb, but then it just becomes such a more memorable statement. So I would find once I would write in that voice or start writing in that voice as much as I could, the character would become more fleshed out. And then once that would happen, the narrative would just kind of take away. That I would introduce another character to interact with that voice in dialogue, and then it would just kind of snowball from there.
Speaking of Hello Horse, the title story, It features
Yeah.
two teenagers who confront a wild horse, and they see the natural world as it is, not as we imagine it. It's also the oldest story in the collection. How would you say that it sets the thematic tone for the collection?
Wow, these questions, Kim and Sarah, are very good. I, this is very nice of you.
Thank you.
I would say, okay, then how it sets the tone thematically for the collection. That's a great question. I don't know. I had a writing teacher who told me once, actually he said Hemingway said it, but I don't know if that second part is true. I don't know if Hemingway actually said it. But I had a writing teacher once of saying that the root of all narrative, fiction and nonfiction, he was Ian Brown, he's a nonfiction writer. The root of all narrative is differentiating between what is true and what we assume to be true. Or maybe he reversed it, what we assume to be true and what is true. And that narrative is just kind of outlining the differences between those two, or where those two ideas overlap, and where they're quite far apart. Perhaps the title story sets the tone thematically, for the collection, is that a lot of the stories, regardless of plot, are, I think, trying to find the outline between those two different ideas of what we assume to be true, or even what we want really badly to be true, and what is, yeah, what's not necessarily the case. I remember the first time I saw Wild Horse, that I, kind of like the narrator conveys in the story, I expected it to be like the most majestic and beautiful thing in my life. There's a poem by, I want to say, James Wright, where he talks about meeting up with a horse, and he says something along the lines of, at any moment I could burst into blossom. And so I expected the same thing to happen when I saw a wild horse. And I remember seeing one and thinking like, oh my God, they're hideous. They're kind of but which is kind of all the better in a way, that they're like these kind of mangy or like ruthless. They're mean. They're very, my understanding, very mean all the time, because they have to be, because they're wild and they're trying to survive. So that discrepancy, kind of on a literal level, is shows the differentiation between what we assume to be true and what is actually true. And then I just kind of try to extrapolate that throughout a larger narrative over the course of the story and the collection.
That's amazing. Well, Hemingway said a lot of different things, so who
Yeah.
keep track? Yeah. So, as well as wild horses, the collection has a large cast of quirky characters, for the benefit of our listeners who are going to read this soon. Some of them are a woman who finds religion in trying to keep a greyhound from winning at the track, a talking dog, and a group of hockey-playing nuns in a post-apocalyptic convent. What makes a character interesting to you? And how do you know when you've got one that's going to work? Does it go back to that, what you were talking about, voice, or is there something else as well?
I think, Sarah, I had another writing teacher, Doug Glover, who once told me that we want to write characters that are smarter than ourselves. And I remember him telling me that, because it did really change my approach to not just character, but story as a whole, writing as a whole, even outside of fiction. That I felt like before he told me that, I used to be trying to convey how smart I, as the writer, was in my writing, which is perhaps the most obnoxious thing you can do in writing. And that, so I try my best to create characters that are smarter than me, and that intelligence, of course, takes many different forms. One way I think that intelligence takes form, specifically in my short stories, is that they're characters who are more emotionally intelligent than myself, that they're able to kind of connect and see people in a way that I myself often wish I was able to do in my day-to-day life. and I think they're able to do this because of how much I edit them to do so. I try to be really generous with my characters in that sense too, like to see them in the best light and have them trying to see the world in the best light as well. And that once I feel myself on their side, maybe to answer your question, Sarah, is when I feel like I have a character that I can build a story around. Once I'm kind of rooting for them, is when I feel the story has propulsion in that way.
Many of the stories in this book feature rather dark settings or events, but there are also Easter eggs, surprising moments that make the readers stop to laugh out loud. How do you approach blending drama or tension with humor in a story?
Sure. I would say it's an excellent question, Kim. I would say for my money, the best writer ever is Shakespeare, which I know is kind of like an obnoxious thing to say. But I really love him. And I think over the course of, so in almost really in all of his plays, even the most serious ones, Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, there's a clown or like a fool character. And oftentimes what those scenes do is not only provide comic relief or like a bit of breath of fresh air within, which is what otherwise would be a very serious few hours, but they also have a way of clarifying or refocusing the themes and ideas of the play or the narrative at hand. So I like to think of adding comedy, not just for comedic relief or that it's kind of fun to do, but that it's also an opportunity to distill or restate the ideas that I'm trying to accomplish in the story. If I may add on to that, with short fiction in particular, my mother had a great line once that really changed my approach to writing. She was talking about short stories, and she said, most Canadian short stories, I mean, just slit my wrists already. And it's by far the most graphic thing she's ever said in her entire life. And I really see that, especially in relation to Canadian short stories. For her, like most Canadians, I would assume, encounter most short stories in school, stuff that we're forced to read. And birch trees are usually involved, some sort of storm gathering over a barn. And they're incredibly bleak and relentless in their themes. And she said that, and that really stuck in my mind over the course of like the 10 years it took me to write this collection, to kind of go against that. I think adding humor into a story is, for me at least, a thrilling type of artistic risk to do, that I feel drama in some sense. Do I want to say this? Yeah, I'll give it a shot. Some sense in drama, I feel that drama is easier to accomplish, that I can say something sad and we can all kind of agree that it's sad and go along with the conceit of it. But to say something that's funny, there's a risk to it, because it's less, I don't know, it demands more of an emotional response than I think drama does for it to succeed. And so when I try to include humor as much as I can and do in the stories, to me, there's kind of a risk to it that I find quite fun as a writer.
As on top of the nuns who are playing hockey, the stories in this book frequently feature some sort of religion. You also wrote a book about being in the Badlands passion play, and you won a National Magazine Award for a piece about an obsession with building Christmas villages. What attracts you as a writer to unique and unusual forms of religious expression, do you think? Is that going back to your thoughts on humor?
Sure, yeah. I would say Okay. Aside from the Passion Play, the book about the Passion Play, I don't really realize the religious themes and connotations in my work until I show it to other people, and then they point them out. I myself am not religious. I did go to Catholic school growing up, and I think that really informed my appreciation of stories in a lot of ways. A large part of Catholic school is really just telling stories and memorizing stories and being able to recite stories when given certain numbers that correlate to certain stories. And so I think it's kind of it's just kind of defaulted into the lens that I view narrative in many ways. A lot of the writers that I love, like Shakespeare would be another example, at the risk of beating a dead horse, or horse to. I kind of forget never mind. Yeah, Shakespeare has a large amount of like a constant inference to religion in his plays. So it's just kind of the lens through which I see narrative. I try to actually get rid of it at times, that I get edits back, and yeah, and then I don't want okay, maybe this is it. When there's a religious connotation in the story, the implication or the assumption, understandable assumption, would be that there's like a strong moral point that the story is proving. And nothing as a reader could be more boring for me than to read a story that's trying to teach me how to live a good life. So I went through a large part where I was trying to get rid of my any like religious connotations or religious inference in stories, because I definitely did not want that moral diatribe coming through. Then I kind of just gave up and accepted who I was, and how I wanted to write. And something that's kind of interesting for me about including religious aspects is that I think this isn't going to get me in trouble. How much of the Bible is unsure about what it's saying, or that there's like this overarching mystery to all the stories in the Bible, especially many of the Old Testament ones, that go against large parts of having an absolute knowledge of something or an absolute view on how to live a life. And for me, that expanse is the same expanse that's present in many of the short stories that I love, like in Chekhov's short stories, this uncertainty of what's the proper way to live. So I stopped editing out those religious references so relentlessly as I used to.
Well, there's something that draws us to religion that's with the mystique of it and the mystery. I mean, yeah, that's just a human interest. So yeah, I think that's true. So the collection ends with a dystopian novella. It's about a group of nuns who play hockey in a mountaintop convent while wildfires burn civilization. The nuns and the orphans they're caring for also help convent visitors go topside or to heaven. What was the inspiration for this story? And do you think it works with or contrasts with the rest of the collection?
The inspiration for the story, I guess, came in a few different ways. The wildfire idea. I just recently have moved to Vancouver, like every other sucker. But I used to live in this small town in the middle of BC, Rossland. That's on top of the mountain in an old, like extinct volcano's caldera. And the wildfires there in the summers, especially more and more, are quite bad. And it does kind of seal off the world. The wildfire smoke seals off the town from the rest of the world, that usually, like in winter, you can look forever, but the smoke kind of gathers in two layers, above you and then beneath you. So all the world is, it just kind of becomes this gray slice of itself, or slice of itself through two layers of gray. So I thought that's kind of a neat place to set a story because of the mystery that exists on either side of that smoke. The nuns playing hockey, there, I don't, it just kind of seemed like a fun image to me. I don't even know really what came about, but just like this long black on the ice. Yeah, it just seemed like a fun image to me. I remember the first sentence of the story, I think, is sometimes when we were lucky, the nuns joined us. And I kind of like that idea of usually nuns in a story are like this presence of evil, which is kind of true in this story too. But I like that idea of that upending of expectations, that sometimes when we were lucky, the nuns join us, and then the nuns turn out to be like these phenomenal hockey players because that's all there is to do up there. And yeah, I just kind of liked the contrast of that and thought it was an interesting way to start the story. Yeah, and just kind of went from there.
Very cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Kim, I feel like I rambled on and actually forgot part of your question. Did I answer your question?
It was perfect. You're great.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
And the nuns playing hockey are a great image. Yes.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you're busy promoting this book at the time of recording. But do you have anything sort of cooking on the back burner? What are you writing now?
Right now, I'm writing and kind of finalizing a book of essays that I believe is going to come out in either late 2025 or early 2026. Essays, actually, my publisher has explicitly discouraged me from using that word because he says it bores people to death. I write for magazines, and so the collection is many of the magazine pieces I've written over the years about. You mentioned the one about Christmas villages. Yeah, there's other stuff there, like how much I love volleyball, for example, and just those pieces over the kind of the best ones from the past 10 years are being in a collection. And then so I'm kind of editing those and just trying to make them as good as possible. I'm also trying to write one final essay. When I was writing the essays, I had no idea or intention of making them a collection. But then when they got put into a collection, I kind of saw that there was a neat arc that I write in all the essays, I think, are in like a first person. And I talk about like my friends and my relationships in the essays, even when I'm talking about like a different subject at hand. So when they're compiled together, it's something that I wasn't expecting. It's kind of a trajectory. There's a thread narrative that's never the primary narrative of the essays, but when put together, you can kind of see, my relationships with people change over the course of the 10 years that it took me to write them. So this final essay for the collection is the first one I'm writing with the idea that this essay has to stand alone in Maclean's, and then will also be the final essay of this collection. And I don't know, it's proving impossible because there's that expectation that it needs to kind of serve two masters. I'm having a hell of a time with that. But anyways, so what I'm working on is really writing my editor various excuses of why I've missed another deadline. So that's taking up most of my days now.
It's like you wrote a memoir without intending to.
Yeah, it is kind of neat. And now it's all just falling apart at the finish line. Yeah.
Oh, so would you like to read from Hello Horse for our audience?
I'd love to. Thank you very much. And I would also like to say once again, Kim and Sarah, thank you very much for including me on the show today. It's been really nice, you two. I thought I was planning on reading something else, but I thought since we were just talking about the final story, and then I mentioned the first line, I should go back to check if that's actually the first line, and then I might just keep going from there and read a few minutes. Yeah, so this is from the final story, the novella in the collection called Satellite. Sometimes when we were lucky, the nuns joined us. Okay, I think I was right. Was it? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, good. Good. Sometimes when we were lucky, the nuns joined us. There were enough skates to go around, and the good sticks were always set aside. Mother Superior Pamela used the CCM carbon fiber with the jet speed grip offered by a family of 6 from northern Alberta, while Sister Gillian swore by a Hespeler composite offered by a widow who trudged all the way from Winnipeg, losing his wife and teenage son on the journey. There's no convent in Moose Jaw anymore? Sister Gillian had asked him as she eyed the left-handed curve of the Hespeler's blade. Sorry, I should also just note something really quickly. The book, something that's lovely about publishing a book is people say nice things about it, which is just really sweet. Sometimes people say mean things about it, which in its own way is almost more rewarding. Like when someone has a takedown piece, you can kind of live off that hatred, me, for years. And what the book was panned in a magazine, I guess a couple months ago now. But in some ways, what the reviewer took issue with in the book is in some ways like the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my writing. One of the pull quote from the whole review is, "But by far, the biggest issue with this collection is just how Canadian it is." And I really felt seen. He truly read the book. There's no question about that. Anyways, in reading these opening paragraphs with the Moose Jaw and Winnipeg and northern Alberta, it is quite I can see where he's coming from. He is okay. I'd asked him as she had the left-handed curve of the Hespeler's blade. The man's fingers had been blackened by ash and frostbite, so he sandwiched the pen between both hands to scrawl his signature in the guest book. As he said, everyone in Moose Jaw went topside a few years ago. Same with the convents in Kenora, Missoula, even the Twin Cities. "It's just you folks up here," he said, "and the one in that abandoned military bunker in Colorado." "Thank heavens you made it," Sister Gillian said, as she used a penknife to scratch her name into the Hespeler's shaft. "I'll be sure to," said the man, who, against his best efforts of mourning, succumbed to a smile as I escorted him to the chamber. On the rink, Sister Gillian snapped the puck to Sister Philomena as the play transitioned into the neutral zone. I fell back to center, where I intercepted a 2-line pass from Sister Philomena to Sister Dolores, and I dumped the puck back along the boards. Sister Dolores gave chase, and as she rushed by, arms pumping, slashed me in the ankle. The pain went through the bone, and I dropped to all fours, but I didn't call a penalty because if there was a ref, they never would have seen it. From the ice, I watched the waistband rosary of Sister Dolores snap behind her like a blacktail. If we had been living in a different time, the nuns could have gone pro. Out of us kids, O'Brien was the oldest at 16, but the sisters could shoot sharper and hit harder than even he. Our only hope was to outsmart them, difficult since they saw the game from another level, one a million miles high. Carl M. and Sister Harriet were scrumming along the boards until Sister Philomena barreled in and body-checked him off his feet. Sister Esther wheeled the puck behind her net as the nun changed lines. Sister Martha pushed up her goalie mask, one that was the old-timey plastic kind, because she said the full helmet with the cat-eyed cage scrunched up her habit. "Burning Man," she hollered, calling the play. Sister Esther whirled left side, and Matthias sprinted in to forecheck, even though we were still changing on the fly, and Sister Esther deked him, spraying a rooster tail of ice, and pushed the puck to Sister Nicola, who, without pause, chipped it off the boards to spring Sister Barbara, who had Sister Francine with her as they charged towards me for a 2-on-1. The rink had originally been built on the mountain's eastern plateau, but the winds kept carrying ash from the unseen cities below, and each morning the plateau was smothered with soot. 5 years ago, we moved the rink to the frozen marsh on the northern-facing slope, which we flooded, leveled, and surrounded with boards of plywood and scrap metal. There was less daylight on the northern rink, but we no longer coughed up bubbles of black after every scrimmage. The rink was regulation size, so Sisters Barbara and Francine fanned out, skates chopping, gowns pulled tight from their stride. I triangulated, my ankle burning from Sister Dolores's slash as I squatted to stretch my stick into the passing lane. Behind me, in goal, Susie screamed, "Let me see the shot," and her voice was tight with fear. Sister Barbara head faked a pass, and I lay down to block it, but she had outwitted me. She waited until I was flat and then saucered the puck over my back to Sister Francine, who one-timed it, her knee falling to the ice from the force of the shot. Rubber rang off iron, and I looked over my shoulder to see the puck spinning in the back of the net. Sister Francine, ever faithful to her vow of silence, opened her mouth wide in muted celebration. Maybe I'll stop there if that's okay. Yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Kim. Thank you very much for having me.
And today we've been talking with Richard Kelly Kemick about his new book, very Canadian book, Hello Horse, from Biblioasis.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.